Hi, good afternoon. Today is October 9th, 2025, and it is 5:26 p.m. U.S. Central Time. My name is Reynaldo J. Aguirre-Marcano, and I'm recording this video from my home at the 2302 Britton Ridge Drive, Katy, Texas, 77494. And this video is just a quick addendum to the demo 87 that I've recorded earlier today. And it's this quick addendum is to document an information I received from the Venezuelan informant. That's my favorite informant. And I didn't want to include it in the earlier demo that I just recorded because, it's unverified information, right? And that demo 87 was designed as a surgical strike against Troy Pickett. So I didn't want to make things that were not verified, right? Like I tried to focus on hard evidence, right? Like that cancellation that he unilaterally performed of the Adams law firm contract, affecting, client firm relationships and finances of the Adams law firm, which shows that he has complete control over the Adams law firm for all practical purposes, right? And it's an electronic communication that it's auditable, like the who logged in with those credentials from what IP address, how was that contract canceled, right, by Troy Pickett. That's all recorded in an auditable log, and that has to be recorded because DocuSign, it's a tool used within the legal profession, right, across the world. So they have to keep those logs in a way that is compliant with multiple jurisdictions. So it's unescapable. So I didn't want to mix into that demo something that it's not verified, really. This is something that authorities should, I think, right? If they investigate this, they should probably ask this question, right, to the people involved. But I want to create this addendum because, well, what the informant told me, and I have to tell you, I think it's true, right? Looking at the whole situation, what he's telling me makes perfect sense. But it shows brilliance, really, like how brilliant these people are. Like they're geniuses, really. Right? It's unfortunate that they employ all that brain power to commit crimes. Right? Like if they use that creativity and engineering to do good, they will probably be a world power, right, on themselves, like by their own merit. But they choose the easy way, right? Anyhow, so this is I'm gonna try to convey the idea in a way. It's kind of a complicated idea because it's really a psychological manipulation, right? So it's designed to be complicated. But I mean, when the informant told me, right, he just told me a couple of phrases and I understood, right? So I'm going to tell you the sequence, right? So the sequence is when the child was taken and secreted for 50 days by Morgan Heibner, William Kyle Adams, and Troy Pickett, and probably El Klein, right? Like I think I'm going to make a parenthesis here. I think now that Pickett is exposed to this level and with hard evidence, if they're still following the DTPs, the next step should be that El Klein comes from New York and joins the defense team. And Pickett tries to leave the case by sending or filing a fraudulent design document with a title that says that I'm agreeing to he leaving the case too, right? Like the same thing that Morgan Heiner did. And then El Klein would, should come in and take over, right? I mean, if they're still, that's what the TTP says, right? But anyhow, I digress. So the sequence was when they took the child and secreted the child for 50 days, right? When I go to court the first time, the very first time, which is the first time I saw my former partner in 50 days, right? And I met that day, it was a hearing with Judge Bell, right? And I was literally crying in front of Judge Bell, telling him that they had secreted my son for 50 days, which is a crime, right? And him, instead of asking if that was true or addressing the crime, he told me, "You're going to get an opportunity to see your son." Right? So there was no interest in even asking whether that was true or not, right? But anyhow, um, so when that happened, right, during the the process, right, the legal process, that we haven't really even talked about the supposed divorce, right? Like it's all been procedural traps until this point, right? Performed by the Adams law firm and Troy Pickett, right? But at some point, right, Morgan Heibner filed in one of her proposed orders, like one of the first proposed orders that she filed, right? There was a segment about supervised visitations because supposedly I'm crazy, right? Delusional, right? According to Morgan Heibner and Troy Pickett and Robert Mueller, really. So there was a clause about supervised visitation, and it contained a list of visitation centers. So what they were saying, right, with that is that for me to see my son, I would have to go. I've never seen one of these places, right? Like maybe in some movies once or twice I've seen something like this, and I don't know if this is an accurate representation of what this really is, right? But the way I picture it in my head, it's a facility with gray walls, like a prison, right? Where there is like a visitation room, and you are allowed to see the child there for a few minutes or an hour, and you pay the facility, and there's a person there watching what you do with the child, right? As if I was a criminal, right, or a crazy person, a danger to the child. Um, so of course that was, I mean, just the presence of that clause in that document was highly offensive to me, right? Because I've never been anything but loving to my son, right? To both of my sons. But anyhow, so during this process, right, and this is part of the manipulation, right? So and I'm gonna get soon to what the informant told me. So during this process, Morgan Heibner in court, not on the record, like she always made this comment while we were off the record, but she made comments to the fact that telling me that they were putting my mother as a supervisor because as a favor to me. That was the phrase that was used, right? Like to make it easier for me, something like that. Like and then the question was asked if I would prefer the visitation center, right? To which, of course, I said no, right? But this wasn't on the record. Like this was in those spaces in which, like in one instance, we went into a room where she was going to show me the exhibits that she had, like the 50 exhibits, right? And she was negotiating all the points. And so in those situations, like we were alone, there was no microphone, and she, of course, made sure to say in those occasions that I should not record anything that she said, right? Like she made clear to explicitly remind me of that rule of this court, that recordings were not allowed. So she would make these comments saying that that the inclusion of my mother as a supervisor in the visits was a favor, or I don't recall exactly if she used the word favor, or if she said, to make it easier, right? But it was implied, right, that it was a favor. It was a kind of a consideration with the word, right? But now that I think about it, she never really mentioned my mother explicitly by her name in the record, right? So now I'm going to tell you what the informant told me. The informant told me that on the September, this was September 11th, right? The verbal rendering of the orders. There is an exchange between Judge Telfair and Morgan Heibner, in which, and I've described this before, right? The judge asks, what is the situation? And Morgan Heibner says on the record, they've been visiting at the Valleyside home, and his mother has been acting as a supervisor, right? When she says that, because I've heard from her mouth multiple times that she was going to put my mother as a supervisor as a favor, I'm assuming that she's talking about my mother. But the informant told me that all that sequence is really a manipulation designed from the beginning so that if somebody audits that record, that phrase, they've been visiting at the Valleyside residence, and his mother is currently acting as a supervisor. That his mother, by his, she's really referring, or it could be interpreted as she's referring to the child, because he's also male, right? So, because both the child and myself, we are both male, the same his applies, right? So when she says his mother is acting as the supervisor, she's talking, supposedly, like this is going to be the argument if criminal charges are brought, right? She was referring to the mother of the child, so the petitioner, right? And that's why the judge ambiguously says, let's leave her there. And then in the docket entry, he puts the name of the petitioner, not the name of my mother, because the judge knows that this, his mother, is referring to my former partner, not to my mother. But the whole sequence of putting the visitation centers in the proposed order earlier, right, to harass me and to create that fear in my mind. So then I feel thankful that they're putting my mother, supposedly, right? They never put my mother. But, you know, they wanted to implant that seed, right? That it was my mother. So when they say when they have that exchange on the real verbal rendition, I am tricked into believing that they're talking about my mother, who is a refugee in Canada, right? That's the reason why when I object to this and I say this is an impossible supervisor, I said this in writing in multiple filings. I say this, right? My mother is an impossible supervisor because my mother is a refugee in another country. She doesn't even live here. She doesn't have a passport. That's the reason why the judge cannot address my motion. Right? The judge has to ignore the motion, because if he doesn't ignore it, he has to get into the substance of whether my mother is in Canada or not. And that would destroy the narrative of who was that her, his mother, right? If they address my motions, we would have to get into the discussion on who they were referring to when they both said his mother. So who's his? Is it me or is it the child, right? So that's the reason why they can't touch my motions, right? Because my motions say things that contradict that version, right? And then if they touch my motions and they pretend like that was not the intention, if criminal charges are brought in, then I'm going to point to that and say, that's not what you meant. And you can see that clearly in your response here, right? You were talking about my mother in Canada. And if they say, we weren't talking about your mother in Canada, we were talking about the petitioner, it's a crazy legal thought, right? Like, how can you name the contentious party, the adversary, as a supervisor of the other parent, right? Like, that's crazy, right? So they can't say that. So in short, what the informant told me is that all this manipulation with the supervised visitation centers in the proposed orders of Morgan Heibner was just to create confusion in my mind, to manipulate me into thinking that when they were having that conversation on September 11, I did not capture that they were really talking about my former partner and the child. So his mother, when they said his mother, they were referring to the child and his mother, not to the respondent and his mother, as they led me believe by all the series of comments off the record from Morgan Heibner during several instances, right? Where she said that they were naming my mother as supervisor because, as a favor, right? As a consideration, right? To not make me go through the humiliation of having to go to these visitation centers, right? With the child, to see the child. But it's amazing. I mean, I see the deception, right? And it's brilliant. I mean, during all this time, it never occurred to me that they were talking about the child and the child's mother, not about me and my mother, right? I mean, if the informant didn't tell me that today, I wouldn't know, right? I wouldn't know this. So it's really brilliant. But again, it's an information from an informant, right? It's the same informant that told me that a key judge is going to retire from the bench to avoid having to deal with any of this. So, we'll see what's the precision, right, of the information. I guess time will tell. On another news, tomorrow, there is a hearing at 9 a.m., and they intentionally made another mistake on the docket. Like these mistakes on the docket, I have to tell you, somebody has to, I don't know, review these clerks, right? Because obviously they are a weapon. So let me show you this. I'm going to take this opportunity to also show you this. So it was, if we look for Bend County civil records, right? And we do that search, county. But just to close that thought, right? So the idea of all that deception is to retroactively justify and legitimize the missing Index 7, right? There's this mysterious temporary restraining order that Morgan Heibner secured ex parte with the judge without even telling me, never served it with the document, filed it as index number 7, and then removed it from the docket and hid it for months, right? Because that document gave powers over the child, full powers, and stripped it from my parental rights, and gave the powers to the petitioner, right? So they need to legitimize that, and that's the reason of doing that rules. Of, you know, when they said both, right? The judge and Morgan Heibner, when they were talking about his mother, they were talking about the child's mother, not about my mother. To legitimize that fraudulent TRO, right? That they obtain and hid. It's not in the docket, and nobody knows what it says. But that's also a funny fact, right? That document exists because that document may protect. I mean, I don't think it would protect from anything because at this point, I think probably, if I have to guess, right, probably 75% of the things on the legal area that they've done in this docket are already known, right? I don't think it's 100%. I think there's still things to uncover, but I would put it at 75%, more or less, right? So even if they take out, and I said this in another demo, if they take out that document, they would be admitting to multiple frauds, right? Multiple counts of fraud in multiple ways, right? So I don't think they're going to take it out, but assume for a second, right, that they could use a document. It's funny because the document would protect Morgan Heiner against the kidnapping or abduction charges, right, or maybe the child endangerment. I don't know, but it doesn't protect from wire fraud. Sorry, it doesn't protect from the wire fraud charges, right? Because that document cannot possibly contain inside a provision for payment of rent, for example, which is what Pickett is demanding formally by filing that document on November 7th, right? He's demanding payment for rent on a specific amount. And that document cannot possibly contain that, right? Because that document is from April 11th, right? How can she make those demands for payment of rent that early on in April, right? When she had the rent already paid, because I gave her, she asked me before taking the child, she asked me for $6,000. And then she told me that she used it to pay for 3 months of rent in advance or something like that, right? So the rent was already paid for 3 months, or I don't know how long. So she couldn't make demands for rent payments, right? So that missing index number 7 cannot contain the demands for the rent payments, right? Which would be a way to cover the wire fraud charges that Pickett, would probably face, right? So that document, even though it could have been useful for the kidnapping, it doesn't protect against wire fraud charges, right? So it's really useless if you think about it, right? I guess, right? I don't know if you would recall in one demo, one of the earlier demos, I said something like, what this network is doing is shifting the battlefield, right? While the entire planet is thinking about conventional warfare and training armies of soldiers and building jets. And don't get me wrong, those things are necessary, right? But while the world is busy doing that, they are training an army of software engineers, right, to enslave us all with software. They are shifting the battlefield, right? In a way, this is what happened here, right? they were thinking and planning for a battlefield that would be centered around potentially the kidnapping charges. But the pipeline, the software I'm using, shifted the battlefield towards wire fraud. And for that, they don't have protection. So it's going to be interesting, right? How do they fight a legal fight in federal court? And potentially, I mean, I'm not talking about my silly, civil demands, right? I'm talking about what a federal prosecutor will do to them, right? On federal criminal charges. How they're going to defend against that with that useless index number 7 that Morgan Heimner is hiding somewhere, right? Or Pickett, probably Pickett, right? Because it's the get out of jail free card, right? Pickett is not going to give that card to Morgan Heimner because Morgan Heimner is his scapegoat. So he has to keep the card for himself, right? So the one that has the document is probably Pickett or Klein. And of course, Tesla has a copy because they took the black Tesla and removed it from my Tesla account. So they had to give a copy of that document to Tesla, the corporate Tesla legal department. Yes, but I was going to show you something. I can't recall what it was. Oh yeah, the weapon they have with the clerks, right? Let me see how I do this. Yeah, so I'm going to open a new window. Right. And I'm going to share it with you. Okay, so if you look for Fort Bend County civil records, and then you click on civil records search county. Give me a second. I think I need to do something here. Just 1 second, okay? Okay. Okay. So then you click on civil family case records, and I'm going to locate that case real quickly. I'm going to give you the case number just in case. It's 25-DCV-328122. So you see tomorrow, there's another temporary orders hearing, which was the hearing that was scheduled by Judge Telfair from the bench on September 11th, because the temporary orders were set to last 60 days in his verbal rendering. Pickett and Morgan Heimner then unilaterally changed the duration of the orders till the divorce is final. But what the judge said was 60 days. And that's the reason why there's this hearing tomorrow, November 10th. If you do the math, from September 11th to November 10th, there is exactly 60 days. Like, that's the reason why it's tomorrow. So tomorrow, look at this. We have a temporary hearing, orders hearing, right, at 9 a.m., it says here. But right below, it says 2 hours, 1 hour, and 30, 2 hours, 1:30 p.m., right? So I remember, I'm a pro se litigant, right? At this point, I've seen so many, frauds with the docket that I'm, hyper aware, right? And I'm looking for things. But if I was a regular person, right, that is not used to seeing these legal things in these dockets, I see this and I would think, because it's saying 2 hours, 1:30 p.m., I would think that I have to go be there at 1:30 p.m. But that is not true. The real hour, I mean, the hour that they're calling the docket is 9 a.m. So if I go at 1:30 p.m., what will happen, if I decide to go tomorrow at the time that says here next to the duration, what will happen is that probably, right, somehow they're going to proceed with the hearing and enter a default judgment at 9 a.m. or at 10 a.m., right, and say that I wasn't present. And then it will justify the unjustifiable, right, because I didn't show up. Of course, that's not going to happen. I'm going to be there at 9 a.m. But this shows you, right, how they weaponize the clerks. And I'm not saying this only because of it, but because of the multiple omissions and crazy things that we already discussed over the last 8 demos about this docket, right? There's at least 4 instances of hard fraud in this docket. And there's an index number 7 that is missing, that is not in the docket, like they disappeared, right? If you look at this, it goes from index number 6 to index number 8, right? There is no index number 7. See, I'm doing a search for index number 7, it's not there. So, and all this is possible because who controls the docket? The clerk, right? So, and they already have set that trap, and they said this, I don't know, right? This entry was written on September 11th because I heard Morgan Heibner scheduling this while I was there in front of the judge. She talked to the court coordinator in front of me. But I don't know if this, confusing hour was inserted that day or after the fact. I don't know. I didn't take a screenshot of the docket that day, so I cannot tell you. But anyhow, I think the biggest takeaway is that index number 7 is useless because the battlefield has shifted under their feet, and they didn't even notice, right? So they were preparing for a battle about parental kidnapping, but the real battle they have to fight is in the federal arena, and it's going to be probably, I'm guessing, right, something related to wire fraud and probably money laundering, right? And I'm saying that because of the crypto payments, right? Like if once that door opens, right, I'm going to be able to show authorities the geo index with the crypto payments, and that is going to open the Pandora's box about the money laundering, right? So brace yourselves. Anyhow, I think this is a good opportunity to leave it here, and I'll see you on the next one. Have a good night.